Welcome to 3 Books with Neil Pasricha, where each chapter we uncover and discuss the 3 most formative books of an inspiring individual. We believe books change lives, and that's why we are the only podcast in the world by and for book lovers, writers, makers, sellers, and librarians. Thanks so much for joining us. Our world is just so full. It's so busy. It's so cluttered. It's so endlessly stimulating. You know, you walk into an elevator and there is something blaring, a TV in the corner, flashing news headlines. There's newspaper boxes. There is pop-up ads on every single website. There are so many things trying to slap us around and get our attention and stick their little hooks into our brains and just pull us and prod us and stick us around and twist us sideways and have us subscribe to their email list when we're all said and done. Don't you feel like it's just too loud sometimes? I mean, I feel like that. That's part of the reason why 3 Books has 100% no ads, no sponsors, no commercials, no interruptions. I just don't want it to be loud. I don't want the show to be loud in the middle of this loud world. And to me, like, what this world needs more of are editors. We need more editors. I'm not talking about people that correct your spelling and grammar. Now, who cares about that? I'm talking about people who can be like the bastions of clear thinking. I'm talking about people who can be like sort of the pinnacles of clear communication, who can like design perfect narrative arcs and storytelling arcs, and who can convey ideas in the simplest and clearest way possible. To some extent, we're all editors, right? You ever press backspace on your email and change a sentence or two to come across a different way, or tweak your text message before you send it? Yeah, we all self-edit. But I'm really fascinated by people who become editors, people who take it as their life goal, as their life's mission, to help ideas get communicated clearly. So today's chapter, this chapter, not today, because we want to compress time on 3 Books, but like the chapter of the moment, the chapter you're about to listen to, is with an editor. It's the very first conversation I've had with an editor on 3 Books, and it won't be the last. And it is with the one and only Kerri Kolen. If you want to talk to an editor, you want to talk to someone like Kerri Kolen. I mean, she has edited books like Lion, which of course became the movie, which was nominated for a bunch of Academy Awards. She has edited A Stolen Life by J.C. Dugard, the tale of a woman who got kidnapped at a very young age and was held captive for decades. She edited that woman's memoir when she was released or rescued. She edited Girlboss, a really famous book by Sophia Amoruso. And she edited, I'm very, very lucky and honored to say, The Happiness Equation, written by yours truly, which is how Kerri Kolen and I met. Landing an editor like Kerri Kolen on one of your books is a real gift. And I absolutely enjoyed the couple years we spent putting together that book. We formed a friendship, we formed a relationship, and I was so delighted when she invited me down to her home in Washington, D.C. to chat about her 3 most formative books. And we really get into it here, okay? We are going to talk about some interesting themes. I ended up asking Kerri what the difference is between a writer and an author, and her answer was really surprising. See if you agree with her or not. I wasn't sure if I did, but we'll see what you think. We talked about world building. How do you create new worlds inside writing? And more importantly, how do you preserve and grow the endless imaginations and fascinations that we're all born with as children, but we end up getting sort of beaten out of us as we get older? How do we do that? And how, as an editor, do you like help those ideas and those messages get communicated to the world more clearly? I hope you love this conversation as much as I did. I am really pleased and privileged and proud to share with you my conversation on 3 Books, this chapter of 3 Books, with the one and only Kerri Kolen. Hi, Kerri.
Hi, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me into your home. I feel flattered to be sitting in this beautiful, would you call this an office? Is it an office?
Yeah, it's my home office. It serves as a guest room in the home too, but this is where I am every day.
So, because in front of me, I see a beautiful brick fireplace painted black. I see two, three, four bookshelves. I'm ensconced in books. Ensconced is one of my new favorites. And I also noticed that books are also like there's also a tower of books in the corner. There's books supporting the lamps. And if correct me if I'm wrong, but is there also The Stranger by Albert Camus? Camus, is it?
Yes.
As serving as the mouse
As a mouse pad.
As a mouse
for
pad.
my husband's desk.
Yeah,
yes.
so books are very functional in this room. And that's a great place to talk about books. So thank you.
It's I feel like I'm in a Disney movie when I'm in this office because there's this gigantic magnolia tree right outside the window. And at around 4:00 in the afternoon, all the birds come flying into this window and they chirp. And so they're my colleagues.
Yeah, that's beautiful. We moved recently in Toronto and we just moved up the street. It wasn't even a big move. And one thing I took for granted, I'm actually just going to move your wires. It's not touching your chair. I know this is a small thing, but I can hear it bouncing. One thing I noticed is that we have a totally different kind of birds. We used to have blue jays. We used to have cardinals. We have none of those. They didn't follow us up the street. Instead, we have airplanes over our house. And I'm like, we only moved a kilometer away, and now we have airplanes. We had no airplanes before. So it's like small, little, subtle changes. Maybe they like the magnolia tree or whatever, which is all going to be beautiful when that blooms. So thank you so much for sitting down and talking to me about books. I have loved working with you and as an editor on The Happiness Equation. And you've got an illustrious career, working on books like Lion, A Stolen Life, Girlboss, of course, and just so many big titles. And so it was interesting to me to think about, hey, what are your most formative books, or what are three books that are lying underneath the Kerri Kolen identity? And you very graciously provided me with three titles, which I'm hoping we can just sort of unpack a little bit and talk about the themes underneath them and just sort of gush a little bit about books. Is that fair?
Absolutely. And, thank you for thank you for coming and thanks for talking about books with me. I love talking about books. And thanks for, guiding me to figure out which books really to choose, because it's hard when you've loved books your whole life. Books fall into different categories. And so whenever someone says, what's your favorite book? That's always a really hard thing. But I think that you gave me some guidance, which really helped to come up with books that are more formative, books that sort of shaped who I am. And at first I felt, these aren't contemporary enough. They're too classic. They're kind of boring. It's going to feel like you're in some kind of like high school class by listening to us talk about it. But it makes sense that the books that formed me are those types of books. So I'm actually happy with my choices ultimately.
Of course. And sometimes we're not happy with the choices. Like, I honestly would probably have to tell you that The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand is one of my most formative books. If I were to read it today, I'd be like, oh my gosh, how horrific. I don't really agree with some of the themes in here. And like the characters are so drawn out. And but it was like my first adult literature book that I read at a young age. So it's formative whether or not I like it today. Yeah. So your first book, I don't know which one to start with, but I think I'm going to pick The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Mm-hmm. So this book is written by C.S. Lewis, published by Harper in 1950. And it's written it was the first book written in the Chronicle of Narnia series, although it's now brandished with a 2 on the side of it, meaning that later C.S. Lewis moved it to the second book of the series.
They do now. There are prequels now.
Prequels
are trendy.
Exactly. And so the back of the book says, they open a door and they enter a world. This sounds like the start of like a movie trailer.
Yeah, it does.
Narnia, a land frozen in eternal winter, a country waiting to be set free. 4 adventurers step through a wardrobe's door and into the land of Narnia, a land enslaved by the power of the White Witch. But when almost all hope is lost, the return of the great lion, Aslan, signals a great change and a great sacrifice. Tell us about your relationship with The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
Well, it's interesting because this exercise of thinking about which were my most formative books, a lot of the fiction that I read turns out was escapist. They were sort of more fantastical. And as an adult, and especially as a book professional and somebody who's been editing books, those aren't the types of books that I ended up gravitating towards. There are some that are that way, but it's just interesting how it's changed, and it was fun to kind of go back and think about this. And I think that I was just somebody who really did love to escape into books, and maybe took it too literally in the books that I read. I loved The Phantom Toll Booth, loved The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And I think that The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe was really short. It was easy even then, reading it as a young person.
How old were you when you read it?
I think that I started reading it in elementary school. I think I was probably maybe like 11 when I started reading it.
Was handed to you? You bought it? Do you remember? I know it's really going back, but not that you're old.
I think that it was in school. A teacher mentioned it.
Okay.
And I can't remember if I asked to have it bought. If I went, I don't remember the actual purchase process, probably because I wasn't involved. Or I went to the library and took it out, I would think. So when I acquired it as my own possession, I can't remember, but I'm pretty sure that it was, most of the books that I read as a kid, I took out from the library. And I remember reading it over and over again. And part of what I loved about it was that it felt different every time. And I just thought the idea, and this is going to sound so silly, but I had an armoire in my room that I pictured was the wardrobe. I mean, it looked like there are some illustrations in the book.
Yeah.
And this armoire in my room looked like the wardrobe.
Wow.
So the idea that if I wanted to escape into my armoire, into another world, that I could, was so wonderful.
It's so funny because there's so many books about escapism, but very few involve like walking into something that's in everybody's house, like a closet, like an armoire. It's usually like go down a rabbit hole, something you couldn't actually do.
Well, and interestingly enough, I was a very fearful kid. So before bed, all the closet doors had to be really shut tight. I had to have lights on. I didn't like to sleep next to a window. And, a little secret, which is now no longer a secret because it's going to be on your podcast, is that I still am that way. I don't like to sleep near closet doors. I don't like to sleep near windows. I find it a little scary. So even if I'm like on the 30th floor of a building, I find it scary. It's ridiculous. But so it's interesting that this book was almost anomalous for me in the fact that it didn't feel scary. It felt exciting. And of course, I knew I couldn't go into my armoire and be in Narnia. But the idea of it was great. And the idea that you're going into something and the siblings and the kids in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, they go in voluntarily. They don't get sucked in. Nobody comes and steals them and pulls them in. So it's not scary in that way for young children. It's very voluntary. They go and they fall into this world.
They push through the clothes hanging at the back, and then suddenly they feel sort of coldness below their feet, and then they
That's right. It's kind of dark, and then they see the lamppost that guides them.
But to your point, they can take one step backwards and be back in the wardrobe.
Well, and there's a lot, and throughout the book, there's a lot of directionality. There's a lot of navigation. So they're always reminding themselves how to get back to places. They're being mindful about how they got to places rather than just kind of, it's a little bit of The Wizard of Oz is like that too. Like she always knows that the yellow brick road will take her one way. And it's similar in that sense, in that there's a path to get everywhere and they don't ever get sucked too far in that it felt really scary. So I can be scared easily.
Well, and can we go into that a little bit? So why was that so appealing to you as a child? You can get scared easily. Many of us can. You said it's ridiculous. I don't necessarily think it's ridiculous. I think a lot of us have so many things like that to this day. My parents both sleep with nightlights. You know what I mean?
I like a nightlight.
You're like a good nightlight here and there. But why was the idea of disappearing, going into a foreign land with an evil witch appealing? It seems like that would amplify fears, not.
But the kids felt so empowered there, and they were empowered. They were told that they're this other species, that they're, the sons of Adam, the sons of Eve, that they're human, and so they're special. And I think that they felt empowered there, and they felt like they were helping. They wanted to help. And I think children are powerless, and they're safe, and it's a good thing that they're well taken care of for the most part, hopefully. And as a child, I certainly was, and I felt cared for and I felt safe, but I certainly wasn't empowered. And so the idea that these kids could go and create change and be powerful, I think is exciting. I mean, I don't know if I would have been able to articulate that at the time.
Well, it's so interesting to hear you say that, because I have been skeptical of the TV show Paw Patrol.
Yes.
Okay, which I don't know if your son is obsessed with, like mine.
Not yet. He does like to see animals on TV, and he likes them anthropomorphized. But they
just slip in that little tiny big word.
Yeah. But not Paw Patrol yet. He doesn't really watch a lot of TV.
Well, the reason I wanted to bring up Paw Patrol is because I was reading a criticism of it, and of course there's good and bad about everything. But I read this criticism about Paw Patrol, and it says like there's no adult characters who have power. So the point what they were trying to make was that, you know, in this show, the kids / pups, the little dogs, they're the bosses. They've got the superheroes. They're in charge, you know. And really, the kid in charge of the whole thing is this boy named Ryder. Okay, so a boy is in charge of the whole thing. The adults are like kind of like, you know, this like,
you said his name is Ryder?
Ryder, yeah, right. yeah. So the adults are like, you know, they slip and fall. They are getting into trouble. They need help. They're like kind of these dolts. And when reading The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, like there is no adult character guiding. Even the first page of the book is like they got shipped to their professor's house because of the war, and that's the last you hear of the professor. Like he's not like a revisiting strong character in the book. I mean, they might talk to him once or twice, but the kids are in charge. The kids are playing with their own time, and I see that Paw Patrol criticism, which I'm like eager to read as a parent, and then I hear you say the idea of escaping and being in charge.
Well, and also I think there's a lot of moments in the book where they're specifically trying to escape the grown-ups. Like there's that, God, I can't remember her name, but there's that woman who gives tours around the home, and they're kind of always like they're not allowed. They're both not allowed to be seen. It's that old like, well, you know, be seen and not heard. But in this case, they're to be neither. You know, so it's interesting because I think that they go into this world that's mysterious and a little scary, but it's the house that they're in is scary too. It's kind of the setting of the book is that the house, they don't say that it's haunted and it's not haunted, but it's old, it makes noise, it's big, it's new. So I think that would be very scary to me as a kid. So going into this wardrobe is really not that different.
To prepare for this conversation, I lay down on the couch in my basement and read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe with my 3-year-old, skipping over some of the there's a couple gruesome scenes.
Yeah, there's some battle scenes.
Right. I skipped over some of that for scare, but he was engrossed the entire time. I mean, staring, like gripped by this story. Who should read this book today, do you think?
Well, I'll be honest, I mean, C.S. Lewis is obviously legendary. But reading it again, it's not that great of literature. You know, I mean, it's good. And I think that part of it is it's pretty basic is kind of the word that people would use now. It's, as an editor, these days, when authors are looking to create worlds like this, you know, world building is an actual thing in literature, you know, and it's very intense. And that's why these books that are usually creating worlds, they're pretty thick nowadays.
You're talking like the Harry
Potter and things like that. So
the Hunger Games.
This kind of strips out all of that. And in a way, I think that's what makes it great. But at the same time, it's not as complex. It's not as carefully crafted. It kind of just dumps you in. So I think that
and
maybe
deep sort of religious undertones.
Yes,
throughout. You know,
I think it is probably best enjoyed by children, and probably for the reasons that we've been talking about. These kids are kind of ruling their own universe, or they're the rulers of the universe, and they're the heroes of Narnia in this story for the slice of time that you're reading it. So I think kids would enjoy it, but I do think kind of the way you read it is perfect. And maybe you'll read it again with your children and you'll leave out less and less scenes, and you guys can talk about the battle scenes and how that's different. And so I think that, parents reading it with children is a great idea. And then I think once, I think I read it, I said, 11, 10, something like that. My nephew is that age. I think he would love it.
Fantastic.
Maybe I'll pass it to him now that I'm thinking about it.
And since you're an editor and you have this insight and you hinted on this idea that there's this thing called world building, can I just pause on that for a second?
Sure.
What do you mean there's this thing called world building? Like, what does that even mean? So authors come to you and they say, hey, I've created an entire world for a book. Insert what conversation?
Well, again, I don't really, those aren't the kinds of books that I tend to work on, but there is, I think when editors work on those types of books, it really needs to be a world. It can't just be, oh, they're going to fall into this place. It's called Narnia. And it's like, well, why is it gets cold right away. I think we almost read too much into it, no pun intended, but we're looking for why does it turn cold? There has to be some reason. And I think it creates a little bit of I don't want to use the word convoluted. It's obviously that's negative, but everything is happening for a reason. Whereas some things are just taken for granted in C.S. Lewis's Narnia, where it's just, it is what it is.
Yeah. Like in Harry Potter, it's like, despite what you may have seen, there's an entire other world that's invisible to your muggle eyes. Yeah. And here's how that world operates, and here's why it operates this way.
Well, for instance, in Narnia, it's cold because it's forever winter because the witch has made it so. But no one's hung up on why that is or all of every small detail about how that might work. Whereas I think now, to stand out, authors feel the need to maybe overwrite all of these details a little bit.
It's interesting as it's as a reader, when you read a book that takes you to another world, you get really entranced. And there's people, not me, that are totally obsessed with only those types of books, like going into the fantasy and all that stuff. So I'm just so curious about that, the world of building worlds, but that's a whole other conversation.
And people who do that are so creative, and they're so, their minds are incredibly complex, and I can only imagine what's being edited out from those very complex worlds, and even though everything has a reason and everything. And I think that stems from a wonderful thing. It stems from the person thinking, well, why should that be? And their imaginations are outsized, and that's something that not everybody retains. I think a lot of kids have outsized imagination, but not all of us sort of take that with us as we get older. And so for people who do and who are able to share that with others in a way that works is incredible.
I wonder if can we learn to regrow our outsized imaginations?
Maybe. Yeah. You write books like that. You should you should do that. Tell us how to discover the imagination within.
The only way I can think of doing it is to read as much as you can.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the only way I can think of, right? I'm assuming that, J.R.R. Tolkien read a lot of books before he invented Middle Earth. I would imagine. Yeah.
Well, and it's stories too. So it's reading a lot. It's watching movies. Mm-hmm. It's falling into other worlds.
And it's funny because when
coming up with them on your own.
And it's funny, I keep hearing I bumped into an artist in Toronto, whose name's Grant Van Gameren, and he runs a whole series of restaurants in Toronto that are really famous and popular and really special and unique. And I bumped into him inside one of his restaurants, and I said, how do you stay on top of these restaurant trends? You're on the forefront of the restaurant industry. Every single restaurant you open is a totally new concept, lineups at the door. How do you stay on top of it? How do you glean millions of TED Talks and read all these restaurant reviews? What do you do? And he's like, you know what I do? You know what I actually do to preserve my total creativity? As he opens a brand new vegan Mexican, permanently fire-based restaurant, these things are crazy, is he's like, I don't read a thing on purpose. I want to sit inside my own thoughts. I want to let them grow and get amorphous and weird and amphibious by themselves. And then when I come out with something, I know that it won't have touched or been determined by seeing how 10 other restaurateurs did it.
Yeah. Well, that's not so unusual. I mean, a lot of authors that I've worked with have told me that when they're really in the thick of their writing process, they try not to read books that are even when I say even close to theirs, I'm saying if they're writing a novel, they don't like to read other fiction. So it's, I think that they feel part of it is that they don't want to be sort of taken adrift, and they don't want to sort of accidentally pick up on somebody else's creativity.
Totally. And yes, comes from both the desire to be creative and a fear of plagiarism, I guess. But at the same time, for me as a writer, like I always feel like the muscle that you're really trying to grow in those situations is a growing comfort with sitting inside your own head by yourself for long periods of time. And that is a muscle that we don't talk about very much.
Yeah.
Because for me, if I'm inside my own head for even one whole day, I can feel a bit claustrophobic in there. I can feel a bit like,
a lot
I got to
of people
get out
get
of here.
anxiety that way. They don't sleep. Their minds are going too much.
The night lights are sold out at Walmart all of a sudden. Cool. Well, thank you for getting into that language in the world with me. Do you have a preference on which of these two books beside me we go to next?
I feel like it's a good segue to go to Anne Frank, just because, talk about somebody who had the need to sort of be in their own mind.
Yeah.
And so she's a good example.
With that beautiful teaser, we'll jump from fiction to nonfiction and move to Anne Frank, The Diary of a Young Girl, often called The Diary of Anne Frank, but this one is titled Anne Frank, The Diary of a Young Girl. This one's an introduction by Eleanor Roosevelt. This is
I could be wrong about this. I feel like the original title was The Diary of Anne Frank, and then it got changed. I don't know.
It says here the original title in 1947 in Holland was Het Achterbos. And it says specifically referring to the part of the building which served as a hiding place for the two families.
Secret annex.
Yeah, the secret annex. Achter means behind or in back of, and boos is Dutch for house. That was the Dutch title of the book, Behind House. To simplify the English text, of course, they've called that part of the book the secret annex. Either way, this is the Diary of Anne Frank, published in 1952 in English by Otto H. Frank, her father. And as we know, selling millions and millions of copies. This is Anne Frank's remarkable diary that's a powerful reminder of the horrors of war and an eloquent testament to the human spirit. In 1942, with the Nazis occupying Holland, a 13-year-old Jewish girl named Anne and her family fled their home in Amsterdam and went into hiding. For the next 2 years, until their whereabouts were betrayed to the Gestapo, the Franks and another family lived cloistered in the secret upstairs room, the secret annex, of an old office building. Cut off from the outside world, they faced hunger, boredom, and the constant cruelties of living in confined quarters with the ever-present threat of discovery and death. In her diary, Anne records vivid impressions of her experiences during this period. By turns thoughtful, moving, and surprisingly funny, her account offers a fascinating commentary on human courage and frailty and a compelling self-portrait of a sensitive and spirited young woman whose promise was tragically cut short. It's emotional even reading the back of this book. Tell us about your relationship with the Diary of Anne Frank.
Gosh, so I loved this book so much. I read this book so many times, and I've read it at every single stage of my life. And I have a little bit of an obsession with diaries in general. I've always written my own. I have dozens from growing up. I'm different about how I write. I sort of journal now, but in a different way. But as a kid, I wrote constantly, and it was either sometimes just always. From the time that I think I could write. I was writing in a diary. I have diaries that go all the way back to 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, 6th grade. But in middle school, I really started doing it. It was like every day. And similar to Anne Frank, it was my friend, sorry for not writing, sorry for abandoning you, things like that when you miss out on time. And I found in my grandmother's house, I found a diary of my mother's from when she was in high school that I loved and read all the time. And as a result, I think I always kind of knew more about her life than things that she told me. And I would love bringing it up. Like, oh, did your friend Debbie think that? And remember that time that grandma did this? And she didn't remember it really, but I read her diary well more than once. I would say I read my mom's diary at least a dozen times. It was short. But so the idea of reading someone's diary is just this escapist.
Is that, by the way, sorry to interrupt, how you got into the practice? Because your family was doing it?
No, and I don't even know if my mother did it a lot. I only found this one.
Okay.
And it was the kind that you can picture. You know, it had the little gold lock.
Yeah,
it
I
was
was gonna
tiny.
say.
Yeah, it was awesome.
Okay, but it was unlocked when you found it.
It was unlocked.
Yeah.
I was given permission to read it.
Okay.
Yes, to take it. I
clarified now.
discovered it and said, "Oh my gosh, I found this." And she kind of laughed. I think she was amused at the idea that I liked it so much, but kept it. It became mine. I also liked looking at her yearbooks and things like that. I think for the same reasons, people writing thoughts that they don't really expect to be read, and then being able to read what those thoughts were, it's an extremely honest writing.
Totally.
And it's different, so that Anne Frank wrote this diary. She was very loyal to the practice of writing in the diary. She didn't expect it to be written. She did fancy herself a writer, and she was a writer. And there's some really, really great lines in there. And I know that the book has been edited, but for the most part, from what I understand, a lot of the integrity remains from the original document. And she writes about writing. She wanted to be a writer. She wrote stories, and she wanted other people to read them. So, and that also to me felt like it wasn't an intrusion on her privacy that so millions of people have read her diary, because I like to think that she's thrilled somewhere that that's happening, that's like so the ultimate revenge that, I am an author and people have read my story, and it didn't just get like locked away, and it didn't go away, and it didn't perish. So there's that. I love diaries. I love being able to escape into somebody else's, it's voyeurism kind of at its finest. But, I was a young Jewish girl who had been told, about the war and about about the Holocaust, and a lot, my grandmother spoke about it a lot. My great grandparents who, were alive for almost all of my childhood talked about it a lot. And there's always like before the war and after the war. They referred to everything that way, kind of. And I think as a young Jewish girl, the idea that you could have your life taken away simply because you're Jewish is really scary, but also really fascinating. Like, well, why? And what is it about me? So I think that there was this young girl who, who shared all of these details about what that was like for her. I couldn't get enough of it. And the fact that her life was so normal.
Yeah.
And the other thing is the culture too. She wasn't an American girl, but her life was the same. She cared about boys. She cared about her friends. She cared about, her clothes. She cared about her studies. She wanted to read. She wanted to write. She wanted to be heard. She was a total feminist. And I really, really related to her. And I think a lot of people did. I don't think it's because I was so similar to Anne Frank. I think it's because she was relatable. That's what makes, as an editor, that's what we look for when we look at memoirs, and when we read memoirs, when I evaluate them. How relatable is this book? Are people going to relate to it in some way? And I think The Diary of Anne Frank is the ultimate relatable memoir, essentially.
Wow. How did it shape you? You took all that, you read it so many times, you became an editor. Is there a direct line in the sand through?
I always loved to write. I've also, like Anne, fancied myself a writer.
Yeah.
So I was writing. When I wrote in my diary, it wasn't just about what I was doing that day. I wrote poetry. I would write little short stories. I didn't always finish them, but I thought I wrote well. And I took pride in that.
Yeah.
And so I think that I felt, sort of kindred with her in that sense. But so I don't know if I became an editor because of that. But I think that the idea that she felt as a young, that it wasn't frivolous, that her dreams weren't ridiculous. I think I'm a good writer. And it turns out I am. And then I wrote this bestseller, and that continuing to hone my craft is going to maybe make that happen. I think there's some subliminal like message in that for me as a young person. But But I think that there's also something about appreciating, and there's a lot of this in the book itself. It's not subliminal, it's right there, appreciate what you have. Anne talks about it all the time. She talks about she just wants to go outside.
Mm-hmm.
And
talk about making the reader feel lucky.
Right. And I think that as, young people, especially someone like me who had everything in the world that I ever wanted, there was food on the table all the time. There were more than enough clothes on my back. I was privileged. And that's a reminder that I think all young people need to have. And it can't just always be talked at them.
Yeah.
Be grateful for what you have. People are starving. People don't have what you have. I think that seeing it for yourself in a book or in whatever way means something to you resonates more than having it be told to you by a parent.
Exactly. And people always say, travel, take your kids to far off countries and show them different ways of living and stuff. And that's really difficult to do, both financially and time and stuff. But
Sure.
a book like this is a total
for $14.99
exactly
or for $1,499 I'll take the Diary of Anne Frank.
Exactly. $6.99
right.
on the back, which is amazing. And you talked about voyeurism, and you talked about reading someone's diary is the ultimate voyeuristic experience. And lately I've been reading, Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, also a diary that wasn't meant to be published, letters from a Stoic, Seneca's letters. I also bought a year or two ago, like John Lennon's letters, and like they're little like fan notes that he wrote to people. Like someone took the work and trouble working with Yoko Ono to collect back from the world anyone who had been written to by John Lennon.
Right.
To like send in their letters, please, or a photocopy of them, and they put them into a book. And it's fascinating, just like how he scribbled little pictures or how he used the same joke over and over again or refined the little joke over time. And it's like a really beautiful window into someone's artistic process. But can you say a little bit more about voyeurism? And you said you've been obsessed with diaries. Is there other ways that comes to life or ways that you try to make it come to life as an editor?
I think that's what a lot of people are trying to achieve when they write memoir. But the difference is that when they're writing every sentence, they know that it's meant for someone else. Oh, I'm writing a memoir. I'm hoping other people are going to read it. There's a self-consciousness that a diary lacks. You mentioned, kindly mentioned some of the books that I've worked on. And, J.C. Dugard is an example because—
A Stolen Life.
A Stolen Life,
could you just before you talk about that, can you give a 30-second overview of the book for those listening who have not heard of it or read it?
A Stolen Life is essentially the memoir of J.C. Dugard, who had been kidnapped at 11 and, kept captive for 2 decades. And her memoir is sort of the story of her story of captivity, but it was really more of how she thrived in captivity, thrived in her mind, and how she survived. It's a story of survival. It's really inspirational, and it's about, a lot of that is about being a writer. When you're by yourself a lot, and for Anne, there were other people there with her, but not a ton, and they were the only people that were there, and she didn't really get along with her like most of them. And anyone in close quarters for that long, it gets to be a little much. But, JC was another example that she kept a diary and she wrote a lot while she was alone and in captivity. And I think that it was always a dream of hers to be a writer, and she felt like she was, and she is very much a writer, and now she's a best-selling author. But that's another example of when somebody is writing not specifically for the purpose of having other people read it, there's a magic that happens that you can't create when you're trying to do the very same thing, no matter how good a writer you are. And there are some wonderful memoirs out there, and the best of writers are very good at creating that feeling for other people. But I think that there's something special about turning writing that was never meant to be read in the first place into something that is for other people.
What an incredible magic that would be. You said it's not possible. Like, I was going to ask you, is it possible as a writer who's listening to this, who's writing a memoir, wants to write a memoir, to channel and communicate so transparently the way a diary can be read, but I don't know how. Maybe it's stripping away layer after layer after layer through
Yeah,
your
or
own
I think
process.
just writing from the heart and doing more stream of consciousness writing and
Mhm.
taking the time to not sit down and make it perfect or not think about the structure so much and just kind of let it go and then coming back to it again and again and doing the work of polishing and editing, which of course I think is important.
Yes, of course. One trick I sometimes play with myself, if I'm like got a gust of energy and it's like a Monday morning and I've got like full airplane mode going on, I'm like total and shutdown mode for writing, is I play a game with myself, and the game is this: how long can I go without pressing backspace? That's my mental
Right.
trick. If I press backspace once, even if it's to correct a typo, I've like decided while writing to move backwards,
Right.
right? And
It's a form of perfecting.
exactly. It's a form of changing something while
Mhm.
you're trying to just get it out. So I like that. And sometimes it's 30 seconds I lasted before typing the backspace button, but it's just a little game because it's like, if you can keep going forward, then you can always take stuff out later. But
Well, and maybe we're going too far down this road, but it begs the question, what is a writer? Is it somebody who can articulate their thoughts on paper, or is it somebody who has the thoughts to begin with? And I think it's both, of course, but there are people who say, I'm not a writer because they've never had something published, but they might say something to you that if they were to put that down on paper, a lot of people would be interested in reading it and hearing it. And maybe that person's a writer and doesn't really realize it.
I love that. I love that. And it's a great, because that word writer is so has a lot of stigma, good and bad. And I know for me, I really wrestled with even calling myself a writer for a long time. Years and years after my first book was published, I even didn't like that word because I was like, it's loaded with pressure to me to be able to do this thing. And yet people say, I'm not a writer, I couldn't do that. And you've just empowered them to say, no, if you have the thought,
Yeah.
then you could be put in the big sort of Venn diagram circle of writer. It's not
Right.
the person that just puts it on paper.
Well, and there's writers and there's authors.
Tell me more.
Someone who's a writer doesn't necessarily want to be an author. I think most authors do consider themselves writers. I hope. I would assume.
But what's the difference? Like, do you have a definition for writer, definition for
I think
author?
all authors are writers, but not all writers are authors. So it's just a matter of being, are they published, I guess? And that's a pretty simple, that's not some profound idea. It's just, but I think some of that is also about motivation.
Mm-hmm.
So they have these thoughts, they write them down, or there are a lot of people I know who just write me really good emails, right?
Yeah.
Like, don't you? And you say to yourself, well, that person's a good writer. I mean, I think my husband's a really good writer. His brother is a really good writer. There are some writers in their family that they just don't really, that's not what they do.
It's funny you say the email thing because I've heard Tim Ferriss mention a few times that whenever he writes a book, I don't know if this applies to his most recent ones that are more kind of compendiums, but when he wrote, like, for example, the 4 Hour Workweek, he says, I wrote it in the form of email to 2 specific friends of mine. And that practice in his mind helped articulate the thoughts better because he's now having to explain it to like Joe and Sam. I'm making up the friends' names. And so your parallel to email is really, I like that. And for me, I find that sometimes I write a really, really, really long email to somebody and selfishly, I know that I'm partly going to like use that email for an article later. I'm like, and this is also going to be like a Harvard Business Review article like in 7 months from now because I just took 3 hours to write back to someone or whatever. So, but the email made it happen.
Right.
It's the catalyst for it. Okay, I know we're going deeper into the rabbit hole. That's good. That's what we want to do in the show is kind of get deep into this. So we talked about The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe. We've talked about The Diary of Anne Frank. We moved from fiction to nonfiction, and now we kind of land with your third book somewhere in the middle in a book called semi-autobiographical, although I believe it was published as fiction, as a novel. And it is The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath, published in 1971 by Harper and Row Publishers. And a couple words about the book before we talk about it. The Bell Jar chronicles the crack up of Esther Greenwood. Brilliant, beautiful, enormously talented, and successful, but slowly going under, maybe for the last time. Sylvia Plath masterfully draws the reader into Esther's breakdown with such intensity that Esther's insanity becomes completely real and even rational, as probable and accessible an experience as going to the movies. Such deep penetration to the dark and harrowing corners of the psyche, it is an extraordinary accomplishment and has made The Bell Jar a haunting American classic. Sylvia Plath, of course, is at the bottom here, was born in 1932, and she died via suicide, sadly, in 1963. The Bell Jar was published in 1971. I must have something wrong here. How is that possible? She died in 1963. And why was maybe it's this
That might just be an edition.
Okay.
Edition.
I think maybe this book was published in the 60s and she died not that long afterwards. I believe it was her last published.
Yeah, and I think that there was controversy around it being published. I think that her God, I want to get this right and I might not be. So
well, say what you're going to say. We can always change it.
You know, I think that her mother didn't feel comfortable that it was being published and didn't want it to be published. Didn't try very hard, but would have liked to, if she thought she could succeed, block the publication.
Oh, interesting.
I again, maybe.
Well, I
don't know if you guys want to fact check that. That's just, I think.
Forgetting the fact check for a second, like, let's just think about that for a second. This woman has written a book. It is a semi-autobiographical tale of chronicling her own downturn into serious depression, all kinds of behaviors in this book, attempting to lose her virginity, attempting suicide multiple times. There's an attempted rape scene in this book. It's dark. And so forgetting what happened for a second, it's like, of course, it would make sense that the publication of a book this personal would be controversial for many reasons. And yet it's labeled a classic and it was formative to you. So can you tell us your relationship with this book?
Well, some of it I have to admit is just, I think I came upon this book as your kind of typical, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Phone is chattering.
It's not a bluebird out the window?
Yeah. Is just as an angsty teenage girl, who kind of got a kick out of the rebellion in Esther and in Sylvia Plath. And, I read a lot of Sylvia Plath's poetry. I liked to write poetry as a kid. And again, this is another like Anne. This was someone who always knew she was a writer, who loved to write, whether, and I think Sylvia Plath and Esther were writing for other people, unlike Anne Frank. But it was published, and felt great pressure.
Well, we forgot to mention that this book, The Bell Jar, was published originally under a totally different name.
Yes.
So she was writing for other people, but maybe also...
Which is crazy because The Bell Jar is such a perfect title for the book.
Tell me more. Why?
It's a metaphor that she uses the whole time.
Yeah.
And it's one that I think is really good. It's this feeling like the way that, when someone in a morgue, when their like body parts are put into these jars and preserved, and there's this feeling of like stuffy, what that might feel like if you were alive in that situation.
Wow.
That's it's so visceral. It's so like, it makes it hard to breathe when you think about it. And I think that was a feeling that it just, but at the same time, the word itself, The Bell Jar, it sounds pretty. I don't know. I think it's a great title. And as
your opinion counts. You're
as an editor, I think we agonize over titles.
Mm-hmm.
Publishers agonize over titles. Authors agonize over titles. Book agents.
You and I have agonized over a title together for months and months and months and months and months. We had How to Be Truly Rich as the original title of The Happiness Equation. And there was many, many titles in between those two.
Yeah, and a lot of these books, I think all of these books that we're talking about are free of a lot of the marketing pressure that authors like you are not these days, where it's not as much, you don't have to worry about, they didn't have to worry about metadata.
You mean Sylvia Plath didn't have to have a 1 million person platform and be hawking this on Instagram?
They didn't have to worry about like search optimization and things like that.
How freeing.
that when you put The Bell Jar in, that you're going to come up with kitchen supplies and therefore we can't use it as a title. And probably, someone would have said that to Sylvia Plath.
Was there more belief back then too that like you could put a book out there and like the market would do with it what it would? Whereas today it's like, what you going to do to grind and hustle and push?
And there's something nice about that too, that you do have a little bit of control over the discoverability of it. Whereas before people just had to find it and it had to be really, really, really good.
Yeah.
So, and this book is really good. And I think that if this came to me today as a manuscript, as an acquiring editor, I think I would love it and want to buy it and want to publish it. I think that it's a classic because it feels timeless. It's really relatable. And again, so going back as an angsty teenager, her struggles with her mom and with her sense of self, she too like Anne. Like, I consider myself, she was a feminist. She was very strongly, I believe in doing what I want to do. I don't want to be suppressed by a patriarchy.
Yeah.
But both of them didn't have the luxury, and that's something that we struggle with and struggle with today. But it was much worse at the time. And I think that she struggled with the idea, like you said, she was preoccupied with, losing her virginity and what that would look like. And I think that part of that was not feeling beholden to a man, but having this experience that she thought would change her. And I think that Esther was constantly seeking the release, the thing, and so she was preoccupied with that. She was preoccupied with her suicide, which I think became almost like a sport. I mean, she loved talking about it with friends. She loved coming up with things. She loved exploring what may or may not work. It's extremely dark. It's extremely sad. It's extremely tragic. I think this was something that this person thought about a great deal.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's really hard.
Yeah. But that's a conversation around suicide that we don't talk about much, is the, we sometimes even project the phrase, they must have been.
That's right.
Out of their mind for a very short time in order to even contemplate this decision, which is totally irrational.
Right. And I have no authority on that subject. And I I think that every person is different and everybody deals with things in different ways. And I want to be sensitive to that when we're talking about it. But I think that when I read it as a young person, there was something about it that made it less sad to read the book, because I think, this is an author who ended her own life, and this is, the heroine of this book is in that same situation. So that is why everyone says it's a semi-biographical novel. There are so many parallels to the author's life. And people use that term cry for help, was writing this book a cry for help. And I think when you think about how much pain she was in, but at the same time, before I talked about relatability, she's relatable,
Totally.
She goes out with her friends.
Wanting to lose your virginity.
Yeah,
Relatable.
she wanted to lose her virginity.
Yeah.
She was really angry about the idea of slut shaming. She wanted things to be on her own terms. She struggled a lot with beauty and the preoccupation with beauty, inner beauty, outer beauty. She was in that industry, Esther. So I think that women feel this all the time, this pressure to be outwardly beautiful, but also how much of that do we give into? How much of it do we conform to? And how much of it do we rebel against and say, I don't have to fill these standards of beauty? I mean, these are things that she wrote about decades ago that girls and women are still thinking about today.
Totally. Kerri, you read all these books at a very young age. They were. I mean, the Narnia is about innocence. Lucy is this character that walks into a wardrobe like the one you had in your room. Getting a little older, you got Anne Frank in early adolescence. Nonfiction confined to a secret annex during World War II, and then a little older, you've got the Bell Jar, exploring much more mature themes around that we've talked about. How do you think about innocence kind of through these books? And also, the question I wanted to ask you is, you're a mother. Would you let your kids read these books? And if so, when? And how do you think about that? Because you read these very young. And
absolutely, I would let.
Okay, talk
about.
Well,
I only have one kid, but I would let him. I mean, obviously, if he could read them right now, that would be amazing. Then I would be letting everybody know my child is reading books on his own. He's 15 months old. So I think that, but yes, I think children should read these books. And The Bell Jar, I think, is obviously, I think I read it at the right time. I read it in high school. I think that's appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
Anne Frank, though.
Do you think there's a book you can read too early, though? Do you think that that's even a thing?
No, because I think that you pick up what you kind of already know in your mind. Otherwise, it sails over. It's like all those... Again, I keep going back to Disney movies, but I mean, I'm not plugging Disney on purpose, but I think that It's like Shrek is so genius because there's all of these mature jokes embedded and kids have no idea. So everybody's entertained. So it's that same kind of idea where the things that they know about are going to pique their interest and the rest of it just kind of sails over their head until they're ready for it, which is also why it's important to read books again and again if you love them. Because you're going to find something new. And that's true with films too.
That's such a great metaphor. And I like this. You're saying something that I don't think I agreed with, but you're convincing me, which is that there is no age too young for almost any book, which I think that's a big statement, right?
I think you want to be careful about it. It could be scary to a young person. Oh, so I could be taken away from my parents and put in a camp where I'm not fed and I'm treated terribly and I'm essentially tortured and I could be killed just for being Jewish, which is not something that I can help. And that is extremely scary. But that happened. And that's a piece of history. And that's something that is undeniable. So I think it's just a matter of explaining it. It's our job as parents to educate our kids on the realities of history repeating itself or not repeating itself, and the dangers of history repeating itself or not repeating itself, and to look out for those and to be aware of them and to kind of activate. So I think that, every kid is different. So as the parent, what they may or may not be fearful of, what they may take as they should, and what they may be ready to discuss. And of course, you should then be ready to discuss it with them. So if you're going to hand your daughter the bell jar, you should be ready to talk about losing your virginity. You should be ready to talk about mental illness and suicide and mother-daughter relationships and all those.
It's not just here, read this and figure it out. It's here, read this and let's
be prepared
to talk about the context. So you may hate, like I do, the ageist categories for young people in bookstores sometimes. Like, for example, my 2 or 3-year-old, like, we started to get sick of some of the picture books. And so I go into a bookstore in downtown Toronto, Type Books on Queen Street. For those listening who may know it, a fantastic book. I go to the back and I say to the guy, hey, what do you got for a 3-year-old that needs to be, I want him to love books. And so this guy a guy helped me there for a long time. He said, I'm going to try to find some books for you that are thrilling to a 3-year-old, but not scary. So he gave me, for example, The Iron Man by Ted Hughes. But that was in the 8 to 11-year-old category. Just like, by the way, so for example, is Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Right. But we read and loved Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
Right. And Charlie and the Chocolate Factory is a little scary too.
Yeah, but it's fantastical and it's thrilling.
Yeah.
And the parts that are scary, we can talk about. He's old enough I can talk about the fact that, Augustus Gloop fell in the chocolate river.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I can talk about that. And I can either censor or, to your point, I'll think it'll go over his head if there's some thematical thing that is too much. I mean, like James and the Giant Peach, the opening paragraph, the parents get run over by a rhinoceros at the zoo and die. Yeah. So James is now an orphan. In the first paragraph of the book. But you can still probably read that to a kid and be
isn't the runaway bunny terrifying?
Runaway bunny?
The runaway bunny? Is it the runaway bunny, or maybe it's Are You My Mother? Is it the same when they go around asking everyone, Are you my mother? Are you my mother? I might be amalgamating the books. Sorry.
No, and I was thinking Pat the Bunny in my head. I'm like, Pat
the Bunny's great. Not scary at all. Unless you have like a tactile fear of cotton or something. It's not scary. No, my son loves Pat the Bunny. But the idea of looking for your mother as a baby and saying, God, Are you my mother? Are you my mother? How terrifying.
Totally terrifying. Yeah.
There's that other, like the 5 ducks come and then only 4 come back and then the 4 come. And as a parent, my son reads that and it's, the mother duckling has her 5 ducklings and then she says, come back. And then only 4 come back. And then the next time only 3 come back. And the next time only 2 come back. And in the end, they all come back. Yay, it's great. I get anxiety reading that book, which my son loves. It's so scary to me to have, you're out with 5 of your children and then only 4 come back and then they keep disappearing. They're like in the Bermuda Triangle. Where are they? I hate it, but that's not scary. It's all about your perspective, totally. Right? And that's a children's book that scares me as a grown-up. It doesn't
Well, I have a children's book that scares me as a grown up, which is 5 Little Monkeys Jumping on the Bed. I mean,
Yes.
that book terrifies me. I'm like, the whole book's about these monkeys jumping on the bed.
Why aren't they learning?
Exactly. There's no learning. There is no learning. The doctor told you no more monkeys jumping on the bed. Look at your sister. She's got a cast on her leg and a bandage on her
Right. They've got
freaking
bumps
skull.
on their head. Right.
Yeah, come on, people. And at the end of the book, the mom is jumping on the bed. Didn't you she was the one telling you not to. Now she's got you can't trust the mom anymore. Anyway, I got these issues with that book, obviously, but it's a fun conversation. It's a beautiful conversation about these 3 books. We open things up, we talk about them, and I'd love to use that conversation to transition now into what I call the fast money round.
Oh, right. I've been scared of this.
You have, okay. So,
but also in a good way, and
Okay.
anticipatory.
These are just a few questions about books that we like to close off with. Number 1, how do you organize your books? You just gave me a very panicked look.
Yeah, because it's not only one way. So if you look around this room, for example, I have one shelf that I consider to be classics, which some books are official classics.
So there's a
They're
shelf of
called
just classics.
Yeah, I think if you go over there, like there's those 2 bottom shelves. So you can see right there, there's George Orwell, Kafka, Little Women is over there, Elie Wiesel is over there. I mean, those are classics, right?
Yeah.
Pride and Prejudice I'm looking at. I'm also looking at The Tao of Pooh and The Day of Pig, which...
Do I see Modern Romance by Aziz Ansari on the same shelf?
Nope, that's 1, 2, 3 shelves up.
Okay, okay. No, I'm just clarifying.
I'm looking...
I do see the Bible.
The one up from the bottom.
Okay. Oh, I see. So that just one specific shelf.
That one shelf, I believe every book on that shelf is considered a classic.
Yeah.
Huck Finn is
I
on
see
there
some
too.
Ayn Rand on there.
So I think that those books kind of deserve a place to be found easily, basically. Those books above my husband's computer are all travel books. We love to travel. We travel a lot. They're also more practical books. What to Expect When You're Expecting is up there. Those are more like self-help guidebook type things.
Yeah, I love that. Do you also keep them as like places do you also keep the travel books as a place we went to, like as a souvenir?
Yeah, so I mean, pretty much all of those books are places we've gone to because we went out and bought the book before we went there.
And do you still buy travel books?
We do.
You're not like have converted to just purely TripAdvisor and Yelp or something like that?
We use both.
Okay.
We love travel books, and part of it is the badge of honor. Like it goes on the shelf, and then we've been there.
Right. And
I'm almost tempted now that I'm looking at it to go buy the ones that we didn't keep. Some of them are really torn up or we left them.
Oh, interesting.
So
to fill in, to have the maximizer experience
to
of all
be
your
able
travel.
to say I went there. But I mean,
And is it fair to say that you're a Lonely Planet person? Is that right?
I think my husband likes Lonely Planet. Yeah. He's partial to the Lonely Planet books.
So keep zooming out now to other shelves because I see all the other shelves. And did I not walk by when I came in your front door a whole shelf of color-oriented
Yes. So
color?
downstairs they're color, and that's just a design choice. And interestingly enough, so my son has been slowly taking over that area. And every time I have to empty the books out of the shelf, which is something you don't think of when you color coordinate your books, I have to rearrange the rest. So every time basically he needs more space, I spend a day rearranging the color coordinated books because it kills me to have, if I have to remove all the blue books, then they're not in order of the rainbow or whatever it is, but it doesn't look right. So I didn't think of that when I set it up. Of course, he wasn't here when I set it up, but I just think that looks pretty. But I did struggle when doing that I didn't want to pull something just for its color if I thought it should be somewhere else.
Right. So if it was a travel book or if it was a classic, it ain't down there.
Right. And then, right, exactly. And and then books that I've worked on tend to be together.
Oh, interesting. So you have a shelf of all books.
I think
you've
above
edited?
your head, I've worked on every single one of those books, or at least have worked with the author.
Oh, right. Wow. And there's a ton, and that's
not exhaustive. Those aren't all of my books, but every book on those 2 shelves are books that I've edited.
But you said it's not exhaustive. Is there a reason you don't have every one?
I do have every one, but not all in one place.
Okay.
So
it's not like you've edited
this
out
bottom shelf
an author.
to my right. I've also worked on all of these and worked with all of these authors. And then there's a small cluster over there. And some of it is just where there's space. And then also this is a guest room as well as my home office. So I like to have books that I know are kind of popular, almost like when you go to a hotel and there's a shelf. So if somebody should come here and they're looking for something to read, there are crowd pleasers in there.
That's a really, really interesting thing. A crowd pleaser shelf. Can I ask 2 or 3 titles that you call
here are some
pleasers?
crowd pleasers: Freakonomics, The Phantom Toll Booth, The Innovators by Walter Isaacson, The Paris Wife, some Emily Dickinson poems for some light reading.
And can I just add, you have very literate guests. You don't have like the Bathroom Reader's Guide on there. No Garfields.
We not all of it is.
I'm just joking with you.
We have like the Best of Philly sports in the downstairs bathroom.
There you go. That's what I'm talking about. You got to appeal to everybody. Fantastic.
We have Oh Crap on the ottoman here in case you're potty training soon.
Oh, yeah, that's great. That does sound like a crowd pleaser too, because for parenting books, it's hard to know like where to start. And if you just go to somebody's house and you see they're reading it, that's a good help. Okay, number 2 question is: what is your favorite bookstore, alive or dead, anywhere in the world? And why? Favorite bookstore?
Yeah. It's great when you're traveling to stumble upon a really cool bookstore. And I wish I could remember it, but there was a bookstore in Lisbon that I loved just because it was beautiful and it felt like a library, but it was a bookstore, which I think bookstores now, they don't feel like they're just about books. There's so many other things to distract you. They're about the electronic
towels,
they're about the reading device, and they're magazines, and there's other things. So it's the books that still feel like they're about books. The physical book has become a breath of fresh air. Indies are very good at that, of course. I love Explore Bookstore in Aspen. My parents live in that area.
So what's it called?
Small.
Explore?
It's called Explore.
Great name.
Yep. And it's, sorry.
No problem.
I don't know if that.
No, we like extra weird noises when you kick chords in this podcast.
They know their stuff there. So they have their favorites, which I think is true of a lot of indies. This just happens to be where my parents live. And so it's a great bookstore.
Fantastic. Thank you for throwing them a shout out.
Yeah.
Do you have a white whale book or a book that you've been wanting to read the longest that you've never read yet? Someone else that I interviewed for this podcast also referred to this as the book that defeated you. So a book that you're like, okay, I finally quit this one after numerous attempts.
I think I would feel badly saying that because I don't want to give someone sort of like the opposite of a shout out in your podcast.
No, not that way. It's more just like I couldn't read it. It's not their fault. It's yours.
God, that's a hard question. I should have looked. So yeah, it's a hard question. The white whale question, but I've always wanted to read Norwegian Wood, Murakami.
Mm-hmm.
And I never did. And I don't know why. And I think I'll be honest, I'm just kind of never in the mood. I always want to read it. It's the book that I've wanted to read as long as I can remember. Maybe now I'll read Norwegian Wood. And then I just don't. I'm always like, I don't know. I'm not in the mood.
Why did you want to read it in the first place?
It's a dumb reason. It's one of my favorite songs.
Oh, the Beatles tie-in.
Yeah.
And
I just thought I loved IQ84.
Okay. Haven't read that. Have read Norwegian Wood.
You did?
Yeah.
Oh no, now I feel like he read it and I didn't. Did you love it? Is it great?
No, it's not. So we on the show are totally against any form of book guilt and book shame.
Okay, good.
Someone's formative book could be 50 Shades. We don't judge that person.
Yeah.
We are about
probably is.
the
There's
love.
Probably a lot of people.
We are about the love of books. So we don't want to feel bad about it. Did I like Norwegian Wood? Yeah, I did. And you know what happened? I then that was the first Murakami book I ever read, Haruki Murakami. I then took that book and went into one or two others of his that I didn't like as much. And I've now, thus far in my life, age 38, ceased reading his stuff. It's been a bit of a roadblock. So you mentioned IQ84. I know that's a giant tome. So with your recommendation, maybe I'll, kind of open it up.
Why did I read IQ84? And why was I, quote, in the mood for that?
Just like
when I didn't just do the Norwegian Wood at that time. Why didn't I say
IQ84 is
I'm ready to pick up
5 times longer?
I know. I don't know. I think at the time it was a new book when I read it, and I wanted, and I just wanted to, as an editor too, at a commercial publishing house, part of your job is to read what's out there at the time. And I think that's what was going on at that moment.
Totally. Also a little wee insight for those in the publishing industry that if you name your book after a Beatles song, you may attract an extra little audience, which is nice to know.
Exactly.
And then the last question, Kerri, and thank you as I get into this last question, thank you so much for this generosity. You have invited me into your home. You've given me your time. You have shared so much wisdom on this show, more than you may even realize. But we've gotten into topics and gotten into the connective tissue in
hope
books.
so.
Yes, we have, in a really way that I feel a buzz off of this conversation. So the very last question is: you are an incredibly successful editor. Do you have a piece or two of wisdom you'd share for those aspiring to do the same?
Oh, wow. Okay. Aspiring to be editors or
Yeah, I put it that. I mean, you can take the question and move it over to writers or readers or book lovers any way you want. But I just think you have this unique background, and you're the first editor I've interviewed for the show. I hope the first of many, but you're the first one. So I wanted to ask you the editor kind of question.
hopefully this doesn't sound negative, but I think for somebody who wants to be an editor, get into it for the right reasons, and which is probably because you love books and you love writing and you love working with authors and writers. But also know that that isn't all that it is, you know? So I think that there's often a struggle when in the commercial book business between you're selling a commercial product, it is a for-profit business, and yet you're also doing this because you love it. And so there's a marriage of that can be really difficult to balance. There's a balance that can be difficult to balance. There's a balance that can be difficult to negotiate.
Yeah.
And so I think that a lot of the job is negotiating that balance in the right way. And so that's something that I think people don't really think about when they get into this business. But for authors, I would say is similar in that same vein. You know, write what you want to write, not what you think people want to read. Because if you're writing what you think that people want to read, it's not going to be your best work. You know, you can worry about that later, or let somebody else worry about that, you know, later. I think that your best work comes from your most genuine work, and then you can work on sort of the marketing of it later.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me. This has been so much fun.
Hey everybody, it is just me. It is just Neil again. Thank you so much for listening to that wonderful conversation I had up in the rooftop, not quite rooftop, but upstairs, shiny, light-filling room full of books at Kerri Kolen's house in Washington, D.C. And a huge, huge thanks to Kerri for inviting me down there to talk about and to gush about books. By the way, I found myself laughing out loud, like for weeks, probably, afterwards at the phrase, I'm going to read this phrase to you because I wrote it out. Pat the bunny is not scary at all unless you have like a tactile fear of cotton or something. Now, I hope that doesn't offend those of you who actually have a tactile fear of cotton. But I just thought that was so funny, being afraid of Pat the bunny. We talked about so much. We talked about world building, developing, how do we develop outsized imaginations, voyeurism, how honest diaries and memoirs can kind of be this most visceral type of prose that we can read. How do you create honest writing? How do you edit honest writing? How do you actually become more honest with yourself in your writing? I love the conversation, the sort of strange conversation, but interesting conversation about, is a writer someone who just articulates their thoughts on paper, or is it someone who has those wild thoughts in the first place? We all know there's lots of people writing stuff on paper who don't have that interesting of thought. I mean, 1,000 books are published a day. So of course there's lots of people whose thoughts are not that interesting. And you probably have buddies like I have buddies who are like, man, they are like a chicken wing guru, right? Like it's like 2 a.m. The lights are kind of dim and you're at the local bar, they're scrounging on chicken wings, and they just drop bomb after bomb after bomb of wisdom on you. And you're like, you got to write this down. And you know they'll never write it down, but maybe they're a writer, right? All authors are writers, but not all writers are authors. Certainly not published authors. I absolutely loved this conversation with Kerri Kolen. So this is just Neil wrapping up saying, guys, don't forget 3books.co has everything, has the show notes, has pictures, has the word of the chapter, and a lot more. You can subscribe to getting our updates on email. Anything you want, it's all at 3books.co. But I just want to say a big, big, big thank you to Kerri and to you for listening to this chapter. And now, if you've made it to this far in the podcast, I'd like to welcome you back into the end of the podcast club. Yes, this is one of 2 clubs we have for $3. This one is for people that listen to right to the end of the podcast. As you know, we have no ads, no sponsors, no commercials, no interruptions. It's pure content all the way. You are not going to hear me shilling for some weird kind of underwear at this point in the show. I'm not going to do that. I will never do that. I don't like ads. And by the way, we have had a few sponsors approach us so far on $3, including some major brands and major retailers. And while we're able to work together in some fashion, like maybe they can introduce us to an interesting guest or whatever, I'm unwilling to take ads or to take any form of revenue for this show. I really want it to be Sesame Street pure, if that makes any sense. But I really want it to be a pure labor of love, and that is what it will always be from me to you. So, as we always do, at the end of the podcast club, let's start off by going to the phones. As you know, you can call me at 1-833-READ-A-LOT. Again, that's a real phone number. It is 1-833-READ-A-LOT. I listen to every single one of your voicemails, and we always play one at the end of the podcast. So here is this chapter's call.
Hey, Neil. My name is John. I'm calling from San Diego, California. I just want to say your podcast is amazing. I hope you keep up the great work, and what you do is really appreciated. I kind of got a weird type A-ish type question for you. You asked your guests how they organize their books, but I was wondering if you had a structure in terms of your actual reading. So I know that sounds weird. What I mean by that is I typically read 2 to 3 nonfiction books at a time, and they always have to be very different in their genres or categories. So if I'm reading Gary Tautz's Why We Get Fat, my other nonfiction book might be Gretchen Rubin's 4 Tendencies. And then I also keep a fiction book going at all times as well. So I was wondering if you had any trends or rules when it comes to your reading. And I was wondering what you do if you're totally disengaged by a book. Do you force yourself through it? Do you hate read it? Or do you just drop it? And another question is, how many books do you tend to read at a time? Or if you have any other trends or anything like that that you do when it comes to reading. So I knew I threw a lot at you right now, and it's a kind of a weirdo question, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. But keep up the good work. Appreciate everything you do. Have a good one. Bye.
John, what are we going to do with you? First of all, you're from San Diego. What is up with San Diego constantly appearing as like this heart center on $3? It was so surprising to me that, after Frank Warren and I met for chapter 2 in San Diego, it seems like people are calling from San Diego. There's like, I think Tracy called from San Diego on chapter 3 or chapter 4. We got this San Diego thing going. It is awesome because it's a beautiful, sunny place to live. So thanks for calling from San Diego. And then I just want to say before I get into the questions, thank you for the questions, by the way, but you said a couple things that I want to just pick out. You said, sorry for the kind of weirdo question. And you said, I got this weirdish type A question. I just want to say, you're not weird, not in a bad way. I mean, you're weird in a good way. Weird in the complimentary way of interesting and unusual, but not in the bad way, like sticks out negatively. You're not weird. Because we all are like that. We all, on this show, on $3, that's the kind of people we are. That's the kind of people we talk about. That's the kind of people we talk to. That's the kind of people we hang out with. That's our community. We're all weird. Vishwas Agrawal, the world's greatest Uber driver, is awesomely weird, right? He is. Seth Godin is awesomely weird, right? He totally is. Dave Sedaris, that's a tease because he's coming in a few episodes, people. He's coming in a few chapters. He is delightfully weird. And so I really take great pleasure in attracting delightfully weird people like you. Okay, now getting to the questions. Okay, you had this great question on how people read. And I was trying to think what the phrase is for that. It's like, is it reading rhythm? Is it sort of their reading curriculum? I don't know what it is, but like you said, you read 2 or 3 nonfiction books at a time. They're from totally different sides of like the bookstore maybe. And then you have a fiction book going. So do I have any trends or rules? Okay, I do have a couple trends or rules. And you're making me wonder if I should start asking this question, if I could label it. What is it called? Help me out, people. Call me up. Tell me. Is it a reading rhythm? What do you call this? But anyway, one book that I stole from my wife Leslie's sort of grandparents-in-law, loose connection, but they were the smart, savvy, sort of 80-year-old people when I met them, and they had this policy, which I loved, which was simply which was simply this: nonfiction during the day and fiction at night. Simple as that. And I loved it because they were retired at that age, but they were letting their brain chew on sort of big, tough questions and problems and learning in that sort of classic sort of school sense. But then at night, they were unwinding, relaxing, disappearing, living another life. So I like that. And so when I have a whole day to stick a bunch of reading interstitials into, I like to follow that. Nonfiction during the day and fiction before bed. Another one I'm really experimenting with and kind of grow is this, what I call the Enlightened toilet reading series. So I used to always in the bathroom, I know you're like TMI, I know, but let's just be honest. Like we read in the bathroom. A lot of people read in the bathroom. I think most people, you got to read in the bathroom. And you might be reading your phone. You might be reading the back of the shampoo bottle, but you're reading. If not, what are you doing? Staring at the wall? Like looking at a plant? Help, I don't know what else there is to do in there. Okay, so you're reading. I'm glad we got that out of the way. Glad we connected over that. And so I used to just read like whatever was hanging around, like the sort of crappy like daily newspaper that was published in the subway station or whatever. I'm beyond that now. We got to elevate our game. So I started what I call the Enlightened bathroom reading series. If you get my monthly book club, so it's this email I send out once a month. If you go to 3books.co or 1000 Awesome Things, you'll see my reading club. You can join up. So I send out these books every month, what I read, and I sort of call a book out when it joins the Enlightened toilet club. Couple examples recently are How to Love by Thich Nhat Hanh, right? The meditative dude, the monk. Just like little 1 or 2 page chapters about how to love. And nothing better than talking about how to love while you're taking a crap on the toilet. I know. Should I edit that out? I'm going to leave that in. You're hanging out with me in the end of the podcast. Love. All the rules are gone. The gloves are off. We're just going to be real here. And the other book I'm reading right now in the bathroom is The Secret Lives of Color. Who is the author of that book? It's an incredible book. I highly recommend you check it out. The Secret Lives of Color by Cassia St. Clair. It's a hardcover book, beautiful white book. And it has all these different colors told with their like biographies. So like you look up olive green and suddenly you read a history of how that color came into being. It's great. So those are 2 little, what'd you call them? Trends, formats, reading rhythm. Those are 2 little rules I guess I have on reading. What do I do if I'm totally disengaged by a book? And I love your phrase, do I hate read it? Because I can totally relate to that. Yeah, at a high level, I love to quit more to read more. That is one of the values of 3 Books. If you go to 3books.co and click values, you'll see all the values of the show. It's a constantly dynamic and evolving list. But one of the values is quit more to read more, meaning chuck that book out if you don't like it, because it'll just make space and make room in our tiny, finite lives to fit another book in that you hopefully do. So never keep going on a book that you don't like. I probably quit, I'm going to guess, 2 books for every book I read, if not more than that. The other thing I do is what I used to call kind of like lying to myself, that I used to read the book. I'd be like, I'm just going to skim read it and be like, I'm done. It's finished. But now I don't do that. I don't lie to myself. I do skim read it. And I'll swallow the book in whatever way is most appealing. So, for example, I was just reading a novel called If on a Winter's Night, a Traveler by Calvino, Italian author. And I got stuck. A third or a quarter way through. I just couldn't keep moving through the book. And I was going to quit it. And I thought, but I really want to read this book. I liked part of it. I didn't want to hate read it, as you said. So what I did was I read the last chapter of the book, kind of figured out how it ended. Then I retraced it and went back a chapter or 2. Then I went forward from where I'd stopped, and it kind of made more sense to me. And I probably skipped like 30 to 50 pages in the middle I never actually got to, but I got the gist of it. I'm not sure if I'll put that in my book club or not. I might talk about how I read it in a weirdly weird way, but reading is meant to be enjoyable, right? Like this is a pleasure. This is a joy. So you can read a book any way you want. You can quit a book anytime. You can read from back to front, front to back. You can read it upside down. You can read parts of it. You can do whatever you want. The book is there for us. So let us always remember that, reading is a joy. And if we're not enjoying it, chuck it, get rid of it, or read it any way you want. I don't call it lying to myself anymore because I'm just more comfortable with the fact that there's such a wide variety of ways to consume a book beyond cover to cover, front to back, like we were taught. So let's remove ourselves from those intellectual shackles and just swallow books whole. Thank you, John, so much for your question from San Diego. And now it's time for the word of the chapter. And I got to tell you, people, we've got a real doozy here. Let's hear Kerri say it herself.
Not yet. He does like to see animals on TV, and he likes them anthropomorphized. But they
just slip in that little tiny big word. Did you pick it out there? Yes, it was indeed anthropomorphized. What? I mean, first of all, I counted the number of letters in that word, and it is 17. Yes, Kerri Kolen just dropped a 17-letter word there on me. I think that officially counts as both the longest ever yet word of the chapter and the best word you could possibly ever pull off in boggle at the same time. So what does that mean? Okay, let's go to Merriam-Webster for this one. Merriam-Webster says that anthropomorphized means, I'm going to look it up right here. Where are you, anthropomorphized? There you are. It means to attribute human form or personality to. So to attribute human form or personality to things that are not human. When did that word first appear? Back in the 1800s. And actually, interestingly, if you go on Wikipedia and you type in anthro, you're probably familiar with the short for anthropology, right? So anthro. But what you might not be familiar with, and certainly what I was not familiar with, is the prefix anthropo. So anthropo, which is from the Greek, which means human, a prefix meaning human, humanoid, or human-like, especially with regard to sentience. Anthropo. So if anthropo means like human and morphize or morph means change into, then anthropomorphize means change into human, which in this case, we're talking about the dogs on Paw Patrol appearing like they're humans when they're not. Okay, thank you so much to Kerri Kolen for that word of the chapter. Next up on the end of the podcast club is something really special, guys. I can't tell you how much this community means to me. I feel it growing. I feel how special it is. I know how special it is in my heart, and I'm feeling your love right back. And I don't think anything quite epitomizes it as much as what's been happening following the chapter we did with Vishwas Aggarwal, the world's greatest Uber driver. I just want to show you a little glimpse of the power of this community. Okay, so what's happened? First of all, I wrote a little article about Vishwas for Fast Company, and it ended up becoming, I've been writing articles for Fast Company for years. So if you go to fastcompany.com and you type in my name, you'll see a bunch of articles there. This one went viral. It became, I think, the second most popular article on fastcompany.com in the summer of 2018, enough that the editors of Fast Company have all been emailing me, asking me for sequels or updates to it. They sent me like the rankings saying like, this is like a really viral article. And I can tell by all your tweets and all your messages that people are reading this article. They want to learn the 7 customer service secrets from Vishwas Aggarwal. Also, Vish's life has really changed. He's been texting me updates. He's been kind of flooded with reactions from friends and from family from around the world. He sent me a lot of texts. And he's not talking about me. Remember, he's talking about you. He's talking about us. He's talking about 3 books. He's saying, you've changed my life, Neil, in a lot of great ways. And I'm feeling really inspired and engaged. So much so that he's actually getting calls and reactions to be interviewed on, radio and television shows. I'm going to actually maybe play you a little sneak in just a second of one of those radio interviews. But before I do, what about Uber? What about Uber themselves? Well, I've been in touch with people at Uber, and so has Vish. They've reached out to us, and in kind of a nice spirit of good graces, they've told me that they want to bring, if they haven't already, they're going to bring Vish in to Uber head office to train and teach like a lunch and learn there, and to kind of try to get connected with him a little bit better. They've actually been sending him some of the media requests because I didn't publish his contact info So they've been kind of connecting him through the back channels for media requests that have been coming in. So I don't know how deeply Uber is kind of supporting the show or Vish, and I can't comment on Uber. But what I will say is some people from Uber have reached out to tell me that a lot of people internally are listening to the show. That's really powerful. Like I said, I wanted to promise you a little taste of Vish, our own Vish, the one and only Vish, on the radio. So this is like a 7.5 minute radio spot, which is super long for radio. They usually give me like 2 minutes. So they obviously love Vish. But let me just play you the first little bit and then I'll fade out just to give you a taste of what's been going on.
Nobody is perfect. Well, except for my next guest. He's almost perfect. He's not quite exactly there, but for an Uber driver, it's as close as anyone's going to get. He is the highest rated Uber driver in Toronto. His name is Vish Agrawal, and he has a rating of 4.99 after giving 5,000 rides. And that 4.99 is out of 5. That is pretty much as close to perfect as you're going to get. I have Vish on the line. I want to know the secrets of his success. Vish, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks, Richard. Thank you so much.
So tell me, how long does it take to do 5,000 Uber rides? How long have you been driving for them?
Well, to be honest, it's up to you how many hours you can put in. But for me, it took almost a year and a little half. So almost 2 years I'm completing in next few months.
And what are the things that you're doing that have gotten you this rating? Tell me just some of your little tips and the tricks that keep you at the top of the heap here.
Okay, so well, I don't say they're kind of tricks, but this comes back from the you can say the blood, the culture, the place where I belongs to.
I could keep listening to Vish all day. I love him, and I just love the little things about him. Like I just love how he is like, well, 5,000 rides. It's up to you, man. You could do it all in a month if you want to work 24 hours a day, or you could take 10 years. And he's also like, they're not tricks, like I'm not tricking anyone by being nice to them, by eating celery sticks. I'm just trying to be the best I can. The quote that keeps resonating in my ears from the chapter with Vish is either I do the thing or I don't do the thing. But if I do the thing, I do it the best I can. That's kind of the setting your own standards, raising your own bar. I love Vish. Okay. So now it's time for the review of the chapter. The review of the chapter is where I grab a review from iTunes or wherever. We read it out on the show, and whoever's review I read out wins a signed copy of any of my books, which we happily mail to you anywhere in the world. This is not one of those weirdo scams where they're like, we mail it to you anywhere in the continental United States. I hate that. I always feel bad for the people in Guam. Hey, what about the people in Guam? Anyway, it doesn't matter where you live. So let's grab this one. You know what? I'm not going to pick a 5-star one because maybe I learn more from the 3-star ones or the 4-star ones, but also I'm cool with being criticized. Let's hear the criticism because that's how we're going to make 3 books better. So this one comes from Alex M40. Subject line is great start, exclamation mark, 4 stars. Okay, why is it 4 stars? It says, I love the concept, but I don't care for hearing people in different ears. The end. That's the whole review. Thanks, Alex M. Alex M40. I'm guessing you're 40 years old or born in 1940, or there's 39 other Alex M's on iTunes. Anyway, I appreciate that. You know what? I want 3 books to be different, right? That's the goal. It's meant to be really different. I don't know many other shows that have, I can't say too much about our secret club, but have a secret club. There's lots about the show that I want to be different. 100% live in-person interviews, right? So 100% live, always in person, in the location of the guest choice. It's not just in one studio. We're going to fly to Key West to interview Judy Blume in her bookstore. And we're going to sit with Chris Anderson in his office at TED. And we're going to go to the top of the CN Tower with Sarah. I want to be unique. I want to be different. And one of the ways I want to be different is I want it to feel like a conversation with 2 of your best friends where you're hanging out in the middle of a couch. So I come out of one ear and the guest comes out of the other. Having said that, after the first couple of chapters of 3 books, we got a lot of emails saying, yeah, I like the concept of that, or maybe I don't, but I don't I don't really think it sounds good. So I worked with the production team, and now we've got something I think works for all of us, but I'm curious for your thoughts. So please send them in. Where I'm still coming out of one ear, the guest is coming out the other, but we've time delayed a little bit. We've produced a little bit so that they're both center front channel or something like that. And I have a smaller version of my voice coming out the other and vice versa, meaning that I hope it still feels different with both of us in two ears. And if you're in a car, me coming out of the front left speaker of your car and the guest coming out of the front right speaker of your car. But is it working? That's what I'd love to know. Alex M. and anyone else listening, please feel free to get in touch. And so now we've come to the end of a slightly elongated end of the podcast club. This is a pure joy. This is such a pure joy. I mean, it's super late at night when I'm recording this. I'm in the basement of my house. I am feeling so much love and connection around the world. I can almost picture, if I close my eyes, like the globe, the planet, Earth, and all these crazy like flying lightning bolts from New York to New Delhi to New Zealand to other cities that don't start with O, based on the emails I'm getting from you guys, based on the notes I'm getting on Twitter, based on the phone calls I'm getting at 1-833-READ-A-LOT, I feel really, really privileged that we are connecting people who want to read more and want to read better. You don't have a super long life, right? And a reader lives 1,000 lives before he dies. And the man who never reads lives only one. Until next time, until the next chapter we have together, until the next curvature of the lunar cycle dictates when our next chapter will be dropped. Remember, it's on the exact minute of every full moon and the exact minute of every new moon for the next 14 years. I am your humble servant, Neil Pasricha, bidding you farewell, so long, and a final remember that you are what you eat and you are what you read. Thanks so much for listening.